I am excited to welcome our industry partner DATABASICS as well as Humentum member Pathfinder International to speak today about their experiences with time tracking and what they have to offer to our members. For housekeeping, everybody is muted on the call if you are a participant, and you can ask questions, or if you're having technical difficulties, you can message in the chat. And you will see that pop up just now. I've just put a message in there. So if you have any questions, you can put them in there. You can also message people privately. You should be able to message me directly if you have any questions. And then we will do Q&A at the end. So feel free to put your questions in as we go through the content, but be prepared that we will be answering them near the end of the content. And if you do have questions we don't get to, we will make sure to follow up and make sure everybody gets their questions addressed. So with that, I am very excited to introduce Chris Harley from DATABASICS, Jen Schofield, and Brian Cunningham from Pathfinder International. And thank them all for their time and being here today to share their experience with time tracking and lead management. So with that, thank you.
Thanks, Jessica, and thanks everyone for joining us here today. As Jessica just mentioned, any questions you guys have, please feel free to go ahead and enter those as we go through the presentation here today. We certainly have some time here at the end where we can jump in and answer any additional questions you have. I probably won't stop as I go through here, but I'll certainly make sure we cover all those at the end. And if for some reason we don't get a chance to answer all of them, we will follow up directly, after this presentation. Again, my name is Chris Harley. I'm the Vice President of Sales here at DATABASICS. The agenda we're looking to run you through here today was quick introductions. I'm very lucky to be joined by a couple members of the Pathfinder International team who will spend some time today talking about not only talking about in general challenges that we see from a time and lead management perspective, but also how they've been able to implement technology to help their individual organizations. So we'll go through some quick introductions. I will then talk to industry challenges and then how organizations are leveraging technology to meet these challenges. And then we'll get into the case study with Pathfinder and the team there, and we'll wrap this up with some Q&A. But really wanted to first start with a quick introductions by the team that's joining us here today. Why don't I let Brian Cunningham first introduce himself and give a little background as far as his role there at Pathfinder.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. As Chris said, my name is Brian Cunningham, and I am the Finance Systems Director at Pathfinder. I've worked at Pathfinder for 16 years, and I'm responsible for our financial systems application and primarily a steward of data and compliance and process. I'd like to say that this is my first webinar, so I'm a little nervous, but it's an honor to be here to share our global timekeeping journey as we found a best value partnership in DATABASICS and are using what we consider to be a best value system. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. And Jen Schofield, why don't you give a quick introduction as well and a little bit of your background there.
Thanks, Chris. My name is Janet Schofield. I am a business system analyst for Pathfinder, working very closely with Brian over a past, actually 17 years for me. And in the last 17 years, I've actually been in various roles within Pathfinder, ranging from contracts to procurement, and now into the systems aspect of things. So I have a wide background in terms of both just Pathfinder in general and in the operations that we have around the world.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jen. And again, certainly thank you for joining us here today. Again, from my perspective, I'm Chris Harley. I'm with DATABASICS. For those of you that aren't familiar with DATABASICS, we are a more recent industry partner to Humentum. We've been a partner here for about a year or so. But in fact, we've been working with your members going back almost 20 years or so. So DATABASICS specializes in time and expense management solutions. We're headquartered in the greater Washington, D.C. area. But as we'll talk about today, we certainly have been working with organizations that are members of Humentum here going back almost 20 years. And so it's great to get an opportunity to talk to some of the fellow members about how we do assist organizations. The conversation for today is really focused around time and leave management. And what I wanted to start with is just looking at some of the key components of time and leave management, because as we go out and talk to organizations, there's often different pieces of the process that they're looking to automate. And one of the interesting things here we'll certainly talk about with Pathfinder is how they went through here and have looked to really leverage almost all of these components to create efficiencies and what they'll call a best value system out there. But when we typically will engage an organization, the list you see there, they may, or you may be looking to take advantage and automate all of these pieces or just individual pieces of it. And so the first piece, obviously, as we look at time management, is what's taking place from a payroll and labor tracking perspective. And so for organizations, as you have employees out there in the field, it's obviously a very standard process, which is we want to see what the individual user is doing. And we may be doing that because we need to pay someone. We may be doing it because we're trying to capture exception time. But ultimately, we're just looking at what the individual user is doing wherever they may be doing that work. The next piece is looking at automating and integrating paid time off and leave management and absence management. Now, it's interesting, and I'm sure if I were to go through and survey the group there, a lot of organizations keep payroll and PTO, and when we get into timesheets, it's kind of a separate process. Now, there's a number of reasons why. Oftentimes it comes down to individual complexities, as well as just looking at where and how mature technology is these days around PTO. So we'll certainly talk about that. The next piece, of course, is looking at project and grant tracking. Almost every organization that's sitting here on this call today, in addition to looking at what labor is doing out there and capturing that payroll information, is looking to track this information onto the activity that the user is working. And whether we are talking about these as projects or grants or different funding sources out there. And again, I'm going to use kind of a generic term of project tracking here today. But everyone looks at that as a critical component of what they're trying to put into that timesheet. And then, when we start tracking information against projects and grants, there's obviously a compliance piece. So we look at how we're able to manage compliance, what are those compliances, and those compliances will relate sometimes to the project we're working on, but also we look at leave compliances as we look at FMLA or even individual organization compliance. So we want to make sure that employees are working a set number of hours per day or a set number of hours per week. We then look at the integration component out there. Every organization that is looking at time and leave has multiple systems or a single system in the back end as it relates to HR, payroll, accounting. And so organizations looking at how they can take this time and leave process and make it work within that greater ecosystem. And again, we'll talk about that with the team here at Pathfinder as far as how we integrate data and how the individual challenges out there as it relates to pushing and pulling data. And if we're able to get all that information, we then start looking at reporting and analytics. When I go out and talk to organizations, probably the number one challenge beyond just simply making it easier for users is the lack of information or the lack of quick information that people and organizations are able to get to. And so when we sit in a room with an organization, what we'll hear from different department heads or finance group or payroll is that they just can't see the data that they want to get to. And especially as we talk about organizations similar to the members that sit on this call, about where that data sits and how they get that to a central spot. And ultimately, what we're trying to do when organizations are trying to accomplish is to create efficiencies. And if we can create efficiencies, that obviously translates into savings out there. So when we talk to organizations about what you're trying to do, it's typically either one or multiple pieces or ultimately all of these that come into play as it relates to time and leave management. Now, I wanted to take that kind of a step further because this is ultimately the conversation we wanted to have here today, is start talking about the industry challenges that organizations similar to you see. And the first big one is obviously the global workforce out there. DATABASICS does plenty of business with organizations that we would call kind of just, traditional time capture, where you've got, people sitting in a warehouse, or maybe you've got a professional services group and you've got folks traveling, throughout the US or Canada or other places out there. But when we start looking at international development, one of the first key challenges you have is that global workforce. And when you look at that global workforce, you start to have sub challenges that take place. And the first, of course, is local requirements. And we look at local requirements. Local requirements may come into play as you start looking at different holidays to track out there, different leave processes, different leave codes out there. It may come into how your payroll components out there. And so you start looking at those local requirements out there. It could also include items such as multiple language support. So some folks may be accessing the solution in English, other may be looking at it in other languages out there. The next big challenge is, of course, decentralized data. When we go out and talk to organizations, when we talk about Pathfinder, we can certainly talk about their overall accounting structure, but some of the other organizations that we've worked with here that are Humentum members may have one accounting system sitting, let's say, within the US, but then as they start to look at different parts of the world, they may have decentralized accounting systems. So ultimately, they roll that data up into a local office and then have it packaged to be pushed to a headquarters where someone then needs to take that information and centralize it. And then, of course, we talk about infrastructure challenges. Obviously, we're going to talk about what organizations are able to do with web and mobile devices these days, but what happens if the networks aren't strong where those individuals are doing work? How do we go ahead and get that information collected? Do we have to look at offline solutions and all the rest out there? So the fact you're looking at a global workforce certainly makes the process complex. Then we start looking at compliance out there. And when I talk about compliance, we're talking here first and foremost about things like audit trails. So if you look at a traditional, compliance like a DCAA compliant timesheet out there, where you have the ability to capture when and where someone's entering information, the ability to track adjustments and rejections and to get notes and really have the overall audit trail in place to make sure that if you're working on a certain project or a fund out there and they have rules in place to make sure you have the proper controls, that you have those audit trails. And then, of course, compliance on the payroll and leave piece. Depending upon where your users are doing work, we certainly have different rules globally as it relates to leave. And of course, payroll as it comes into how you're paying people, the number of hours they're working, and any other result making come from there. And then the last piece I look at is what I call organizational requirements. When you look at compliance, some of these are dictated by federal, state, and local rules. When you look at a global workforce, some of that's being dictated based upon where someone's doing work. When we talk about organizational requirements, and again, this will be a part of the conversation I'll have with Brian and Jen here in a minute, because it's very interesting how Pathfinder tackles this, is that organizations these days very much bring into the conversation what their users want. As someone who's spent over 20 years in the industry, working with organizations to automate their time and expense process out there, that wasn't always the case. I will tell you, if we were talking or having a conversation 15 years ago, we would typically go into an organization, we would sit in a conference room, and the accounting and finance team would basically dictate what they want the solution to do. Today, when we have these conversations with organizations, they bring the end user into the conversation because many organizations see this as part of their corporate identity. We want to make sure that we are making life as easy on the users while still making sure that we are capturing the information that's required. And then the other piece, of course, is integration. I put that as kind of an organizational requirement because, again, knowing the folks that are sitting here on this conversation, some of you may have similar solutions as it relates to HR and payroll when you look at the ADPs and the Ultimates and the Workdays, but not all of you are having the same solutions. And then as you look at the accounting side, same sort of process. I'm sure you will have, if I were to open up the floor and ask you what accounting systems are you using, we're going to hear everything from Oracle to Deltek to Microsoft Dynamics and others out there. So the integration that we're going to talk about certainly is an organizational requirement because it certainly varies by organization, and the mixing and matching will be part of the individual makeup out there. So as we look at the challenges out there and we look at how organizations are looking to tackle at a very high level, really what we want to talk about is how technology is now in place to be able to meet those individual challenges out there. And in just a second, we'll get in and start talking about specifics out there. But the first thing we look at is how web and mobile solutions are able to go out and put in place for the users a centralized application, regardless of where the users may sit in the world. the web and mobile solutions these days can be put out there so that on a centralized solution, you're able to go out and to create localizations. So if I need to access the application in French or Spanish or English, we don't need to have multiple systems set up. We can leverage that all in a single technology out there and then simply decide how the user wants to actually access that in the language that he or she feels comfortable with. We then also have the ability to put mobile devices out there. Cellular technology, when available, makes it very easy for someone to be able to sit with a smartphone and be able to enter in the same information these days that they were able to enter in through a web interface, or vice versa, depending upon where they feel most comfortable. Now, as we look at the automation side of this, a lot of the areas that I talked about as we talk about compliance and leave management and PTO, and we'll talk about accruals and those pieces, can all be automated. So the goal with the technology is that you build the compliance, you build the approvals, you build the checking of policies into that web and mobile interface so that as a user goes in there and enters information, he or she is quickly prompted to change information, provide additional details. If they're out of compliance, to provide why they are. And then basically, as it starts going through the approval process, we have clean data. And if we have clean data at the front end of the process and through the approvals, we can ultimately integrate this data into your payroll, HR, and accounting system. And if we can integrate that data and do it quickly, what you're able to do is to have access to reporting information, to have access to that information almost real time, so that those folks in the organization that need to make good decisions can make those decisions, or at least see where time and labor is being spent as it relates to individual project and funding sources out there. So we've kind of talked from a high level here as far as, you know, the individual challenges out there and how technology meets those. Really what I wanted to do today is to start talking about that more in a real world scenario and take a look at the case study that DATABASICS has done here with Pathfinder. There is a case study out there we put together here in the early part of the fall, but what I want to do is to bring Brian and Jen here into the conversation and talk about some of their individual challenges and then how they were able to leverage technology to solve that. And then again, we'll open the floor up and answer some of your individual questions out there. So with Pathfinder International, when DATABASICS first engaged them, they reached out to us and basically said that they had the following were kind of the key items that they were looking at their challenges. Now, the first thing, which we'll mention, is that Pathfinder had what we'll call a complex legacy time system. It's interesting I mentioned that, and I'll certainly bring them into the conversation to talk about this, but you know, most organizations we run across, especially organizations, you know, that are doing work similar to those of you that are on the call here, most of them are still using Excel or some sort of Excel-based process or even a paper process out here. So Pathfinder was quite unique in the sense that they actually had a time system in place and were looking to improve upon that process. Now, the improvements they were looking to work and to improve upon, first and foremost, was that they were looking to integrate and bring the leave component into the time card application. Now, bringing a global leave platform in there meant they had to deal with some of the complexities, and obviously looking at their global footprint out here, there was a tremendous number of leave codes they had out there. Beyond just having the complexity there, they also wanted to figure out a way to restrict what users are able to see. So if a user was accessing the time card in a certain country or location, they didn't want to make sure, they wanted to make sure that the user was only seeing the information that was relevant to them. They didn't want to open up and have them see all the information. The existing process they had was creating some additional effort on the integration side. So they were looking to streamline the integration piece. They were looking to get better information out of the application and make it easier to get to the information out there. And then on top of that, they were looking to improve the overall email notification. So before we kind of talk about the requirements, I wanted to really bring Pathfinder in this conversation and talk about their key challenges. But really the first piece to talk about there was, you know, and again, I don't know if Brian or Jen will jump in here, but one of the first things that, you know, was interesting here is that you guys had a time system in place and you were looking to replace that. Can you give me a little background or give the group here a little background as far as why you were looking to replace the time system versus some of the other, you know, systems, financial systems that you guys may have had in place there?
Sure, Chris, no problem. We had a system in place for 3 years. We were on a 3-year contract with our prior system. We'd also had a system before that that didn't pan out so well either. So we've been on a couple of systems, and in the last 20 years in our headquarters, we've been on about 4 different systems. Now, worldwide, we've only been on 2 systems. And so including the last system. In the 3 years that we had our last system, we went through so many trials and tribulations with the system, trying to get it to work the way we wanted it to, trying to teach our end users how to use it. It was very complex. It was not user-friendly in the slightest. And we had a lot of complaints about it, rightly so. And so when our contract came up for renewal, we made the decision that we were going to put out an RFP and find a new timesheet solution that would give us the ability to track everything we needed and take away all of the excess stuff that we had in the old system that we didn't need and was just causing us pain points. So that was the main reason. The second reason we decided to find a new solution is that the solution we were on before that wasn't yielding us great results was actually very expensive as well. So we were looking to save some money on our time tracking system as well as that. So, but there were a few things that we really needed to get underway so that we could do this. And Brian, do you remember for me what was the best, what we started on with this? Sorry.
What we started on, Jen?
How, yeah, sorry.
Well, one of the things, Jen, or for Brian is, I know you guys came to us with kind of a group or a list of challenges out there. How did you guys go about kind of gathering those requirements? Is that something, I mean, obviously you two are very close to this process, but Pathfinder, obviously, as you look at your global footprint, how did you guys go about and who were the folks you involved in that process as far as putting together or at least kind of figuring out your challenges and where you ultimately wanted to go?
Well, Chris, if I can just sort of just springboard off of what Jen was saying, and I apologize for repeating, but during the 3 years of using the single prior system, the feedback that we received was perhaps from every business unit around the globe in the Pathfinder organization. And also, I can tell you with all truth, hundreds of individual staff perspectives in writing. Now, as Jen said, the feedback was predominantly negative, but all of that feedback was translated into the requirements in our RFP, which fell into 2 backgrounds: required features and wish list features. So in a nutshell, when we were a small implementation team and we were a small selection committee, given our size and our geographic footprint, but we felt that with all of our experience and all of the feedback over the 3 years, that our requirements were basically representative of all of Pathfinder.
Okay. And speaking of that, so as we look at challenges out there, so I've got basically a slide here. We talk about kind of the challenges and again, I guess we'd call those pain points depending upon how, as you look at the individual organization. What we found and what Pathfinder presented in their RFP out there was basically a list of requirements out there. So this was basically what they were looking to accomplish. And so Pathfinder came to us with basically 5 different things, or I should say 5 different kind of key areas. Now there are subsections of each one of these, but the first piece, and again, it was interesting, I was talking about this earlier, was ease of use. One of the first things out there was Pathfinder was looking for a solution that'd be very easy to use. And as we look at ease of use, there are some individual components there as it relates to, what makes it easy to use. The next area, of course, is just looking at making sure the business and the operation is compliant. And when we talk about compliance, we talk about, state and local rules, but also just individual corporate policies there. They, of course, had a requirement as it relates to integrating data with the HR and payroll side. and of course the back-end accounting system, and then a quick implementation. Now, this is an area that is, when they say quick, we should have an asterisk next to it, because Pathfinder was looking to implement an application in under about 45 days or so. So that would be very quick, for any size organization, but especially for someone with a global footprint of Pathfinder. And then the last piece there is the best value system. Now, best value system, I think, is a term that Pathfinder uses, and I'll certainly let them expand upon this. But it's basically put in place the best solution for them at the right price based upon their individual requirements and out there. And so again, wanted to kind of turn the floor back over to, over to Brian and Jen out there, is that, kind of starting with, we look at kind of those individual requirements and what's important out there. You talked about kind of talking to everyone out there, but how do you ultimately kind of leverage what makes that list of the top 4 or 5 things out there that are important? And is that, do you bring in, you talked about obviously talking to the end users, but how do you guys determine kind of this is the list that we're going to move forward with when we go out and put together that RFP?
Chris, that's a very, very interesting question. And I think that there's no simple one answer fits all. We did have our requirements, such as DCAA compliant. We wanted SaaS cloud-based single sign-on, web mobile capability. But we also, as you're mentioning, we had features that we wanted, such as project validations. And for us, that is where one time charge element is dependent on another, can be defined in the system, which would yield better efficiencies and data accuracy as it flows to downstream systems. Now, our project was primarily nothing pretty standard by all projects, where the requirements that we had published on our RFP, they fell into the 2 buckets of required and wish list. And members of our selection committee would give a numerical ranking for each feature across what we had was 3 best and final respondents to the RFP. Of course, DATABASICS, you were one of the 3. But the weighting of each requirement was not overlaid until after each member of the committee gave a ranking. We did that so that we didn't cloud people's understanding. What we did was we asked each member of the committee to give their own weight to each of the requirements. And we did this for an interesting reason. Jen and myself, Finance Systems, wanted to make sure that all of what was important in the feedback that we had gathered over the past 3 years, it was a final check and balance. With our selection committee, we wanted to make sure that what each individual thought was important in their weighting matched up with what our assessment was. And I'm very happy and actually honored to say that it did. That alignment also made us feel more comfort that our RFP and what we were doing was aligned with the feedback of all of Pathfinder for 3 years.
Okay, thanks, Brian. And then, so as you guys went that process, RFP, obviously narrow down the field, and we won't go through all the procurement process. We really want to kind of focus on some of these strategies out there. But one of the areas that I do want to bring up, because again, I think it's pretty remarkable what you guys did as it relates to this time solution, is that one of the requirements you had there was a quick implementation. And again, as someone that's worked with organizations here for well over 20 years, I can tell you, I've seen implementations, and I'm sure I've seen implementations go on for years. In your case, you guys had a very quick implementation. So you ultimately did select DATABASICS to deploy for your time and expense solution. I've got kind of a sample implementation time frame here, but I did want you guys to expand a little bit about, how you guys put together this project with this aggressive time frame. And then if there's any pieces out there, I think one of the areas I want to talk about from a strategy perspective is that when you deployed the system, did you guys make any sacrifices out there? And if you did make sacrifices about, what got implemented, what didn't get implemented, obviously you're focused on that end time frame. How did you make those decisions? And ultimately, how did you guys achieve this implementation, which was very rapid? I think it was about 40 days or so.
Actually, Chris, it was more like around 28 days. And how we managed that, we're still all kind of marveling at. But you're right, we did have a very, very tight timeline. We had time between about approximately 20 days between when our contract with our current system would end and when we would have to start a new one. And then, of course, we had to figure in month-end closings, holidays, vacations for people, all of those different things, because we implemented at the end of a calendar year, right around Christmas time, best time to implement a system. So we had a lot of challenges in terms of timelines and things like that. But what helped us to achieve this timeline was the 3 years of work we had put in to lead up to this. So we knew at the beginning, we knew exactly what we wanted in the system. We knew exactly what we wanted to get out of the system. And our goal at the end of the 28 days was at minimum to replace the system that we had worldwide. Now, that meant that maybe you're right, we did have to make some sacrifices and say, okay, we're not going to put in leave requests at this point in time. We don't have it in our current system. We will put that in as a secondary project to go through once we're live and up and running and everyone is using this. But because of our short timeline and the fact that we were not going to cross systems over any point in time, we had to make sure that our worldwide folks were all set up and ready to enter their timesheet for the next period, because they wouldn't have an old system to go into. So our main goal was to replace what we had at the time with the best setup that we could do. And we worked with the implementation team at DATABASICS, who were phenomenal. They knew exactly what we were talking about. We were able to explain to them exactly what we were looking for. And there was really no confusion between the two parties. We were all talking the same language. And the implementation team at DATABASICS was very good at listening and saying, okay, here is how we can accomplish this in the system. Here are your options for how to accomplish this. And here's how it will show at the end of the process, how it will come out of the system. So knowing all of that going into this made it easier for us to be able to accomplish that short timeline.
And Chris, if I could I just sort of springboard off of what Jen said? First, for all who are watching this, I don't think that Pat, Jen, or myself are recommending that you do an implementation in this short timeline.
No, not at all.
Again, we did this because we had several reasons that we did this. We did have a much larger window. We had the summer and the fall where we were doing our evaluation, the sales cycle. Our sales cycle, I think, in my opinion, Jen, if you agree, it went longer than a typical portion of a sales cycle in evaluation and back and forth in questions. And then, things happen in an organization. We knew we had one system, and I'm just going to say we had a system we wanted to integrate with ADP. And great, it integrates with ADP, but another business unit was reevaluating the future of ADP. And so we needed to pause a little bit and get more information on whether DATABASICS could integrate with Ultimate Software, another large-scale HRIS and payroll provider. Turns out it did. So that wasn't even in our RFP, but it turns out we were golden there too. But we were delayed to the point of actually executing the contract, designing the project. So things happen, and we were basically down to the last minute. So we had no choice. There were sacrifices. There were people sacrifices that individuals, we disagree on the amount of days that it took to implement. Is it 29, or do we count the weekend dates and make it 36? But we knew what we were doing was for a good reason. We could have done a 1-year extension on our present timekeeping system, but we knew that system wasn't working for us and was overpriced. So we made the decision, we're going to do it. And after the contract was signed, we said, well, now we have to do what we said we were going to do. And we did.
And there's a question in the chat box that I would actually like to address right now that asks, how many users did this actually get rolled out to? We actually rolled this out to all of Pathfinder at the same time. So around 1,500 people worldwide, about around 16, 17 countries. As you know, we change people, we change countries all the time. But that was about the average of what we did at that time. It was around 1,500 people.
Yeah, and Jen and Brian, actually, that's a great point there. Actually, was something I was going to ask you guys about, because I think that's one of the things we see is one of the big challenges out there, is that for an organization that looks at this system or any similar type of system, is that It seems like, if they're based in the US or based in the UK, it's easy to kind of deploy that home office. Where the challenge comes in is kind of starting to expand it. Is there anything you guys do special or anything different, or any lessons learned you guys have had over the year to how to support that group as you kind of, like you said, to turn it on for the entire world when you did do that?
Well, Jen mentioned that we did stagger what we offered from day one or go live. We needed to capture timesheets in day one. Now, how do we do that? We start the timesheet training of how to enter a timesheet, how to navigate the system from the dashboard, drilling into the timesheet, how to work with supervisors to review and to approve those timesheets. We did that 2 weeks, began 2 weeks prior to go live. And given our footprint internationally and the struggle we have with time zones, we have multiple meetings per day. The first meeting would be at 7 a.m. and then we would do a 10 a.m. We do that 2 or 3 days a week. And then we would do one meeting that would have more late morning and early afternoon to target our US audiences. That really helped. Another lesson learned is when you have your go-to-meetings, your go-to-webinars, pay attention to the attendees list. Understand who you're reaching so that you understand who and where your gaps are, because you may need to do something different and unique to target those who are not receiving the training. So it's not just delivering, it's understanding who's consuming. And lastly, this was a nice thing, is that we didn't have PTO balances loaded until the end of January, so 30 days post go live. And we published all of the dates of when things would be available on the DATABASICS dashboard when people first logged in. We also wrote that we would not be supporting mobile use until the end of February. To our surprise, the largest audience of mobile users that you can monitor and report on within DATABASICS was actually from our country offices. And they didn't even have training on it. They just knew where to go to get the app, and they were using it without any training because it is that user friendly. It is intuitive. So that's a fun fact. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, no, and thanks. And again, like I said, I think that's one of the deployment and again, to speak from a DATABASICS perspective, I think that's still one of the areas that we work with organizations the most is, again, how do we take what we have deployed here and really kind of leverage it throughout the entire organization. And again, making sure that we've got everyone comfortable, which kind of feeds us into so obviously you guys implemented the application, and in the end, we kind of look at kind of the, what we set out to accomplish and what we did accomplish. And one of the first things, of course, was talking about easy use. So putting in place a simplified user experience. And Jen or Brian, one I was talking earlier about, making sure they've got mobile apps, but also do they have the ability to restrict the data they're seeing? We haven't talked too much about integration, and so in a second here, I'll turn that over to you. I assume, Jen, and kind of talk about some of the integration and what you've been doing from that perspective. You're able to go out there and to support that global footprint as it relates to different policies for different countries. Of course, everyone is on a single platform there of the time solution, and you have the ability to go ahead and to submit and approve that data. And ultimately, what we look at as kind of that best value. And again, that I know that's kind of a Pathfinder term for what took place, but once you guys had rolled the application out, I guess one of the things I'd like to understand here is, again, and I know, Brian, you touched upon a little bit earlier, but feedback. Do you guys go back and ask the customer or ask your employees what they think of the system, or how do you go about just general feedback as it relates to the users and administrators? And then the next question on that is that with that feedback, how do you determine those adjustments or modifications you're going to make, or kind of along those lines? But if you guys could give a little detail as far as, what do you do to get feedback, and what do you do with that feedback once you have it?
So, Chris, we've always been a very transparent team, and we've always, no matter what the task at hand is, whether it's rolling out a new timesheet system, whether it's changing a policy of some kind. We're always very transparent with our users and requesting feedback. When we rolled out DATABASICS and we did all of those meetings with people beforehand to do the trainings, at the end of every training, we said, look, this is what we have. This is what we're going for. If you see something right now that doesn't jive with what your country will be needing, if you see something that you think is not going to work for a certain reason, please let us know as soon as possible. And even after the fact, how are you doing? How are you feeling about this? And to be honest, we really have not had any negative feedback from people about this system, which is a complete 180 of what we had from the other system. So it's been actually very, very well perceived, very well used. And people are very much enjoying it. And you know what? It's just easy. It's an easy system for them to use. And that was one of the biggest challenges they had with the last one and the biggest complaint. And now they have an easy system and they're just so happy with it.
And Chris, if I could just add that as part of our annual organizational audit process, please remember this is our 11th month, so not a full year yet, partnering with DATABASICS. But as part of our fiscal 21 annual audit, we will be sending out surveys regarding all of our business systems, reiterating the questions that Jen just said. But it's part of our audit process, part of our insurance of compliance, and that we are still using a best value system for Pathfinder. This type of review is incorporated in our annual audit.
Okay. We were talking kind of about the users. Obviously, the users are liking it. I know, we certainly have some finance and accounting folks sitting here on the call. Jen or Brian, is there anything there that you guys are seeing from efficiencies that you're creating or trying to create out there that we should talk about from the accounting and finance side, or a reporting, or anything there that you're looking to get out of these solutions, or looking to in the future get out of these solutions that we should be talking about?
So, Chris, there is a question in the chat box that kind of relates to this as well. Okay. And it's do we have staff based in project communities with limited connectivity? And if so, how do we get our timely reports from them? So one of the things that we've been going back and forth with you on is it possible to do an offline timesheet? That's still in the works. We're talking about it. We don't have it yet. But what we have been doing is, yes, we do have staff based in communities who have limited connectivity. We have staff based in Ethiopia, and the government of Ethiopia decides to just shut down the internet sometimes. Nothing they can do about it. That's just how it goes. And so over the last 11 months, we have learned how to try to adapt to these different things. But one of the things of the system that has made this easier for us in this type of a situation is the system has proxies. So if there are drivers out in the middle of nowhere and they can't get to something, if they can relate to an administrative person in their office, okay, I worked 8 hours on this project and 8 hours on this project. That person will proxy in and be able to complete the timesheet for the person who is in some remote area who cannot do that. Now, obviously, we have to put some controls in place as to who can do this and when they can do it and that sort of thing. But it has given us a little bit more flexibility to be able to get the timesheets in on a more timely manner from those people who are in far off places.
And Chris, I just saw a message from someone, Amy Palmer. Hello, Amy. And I'd like
Hi, Amy.
Some of the efficiencies we have in integration and movement of data, if I would. And as I say, the first efficiency that we realized is that DATABASICS could accommodate the accounting structure found in our transactional accounting system, Serenic Navigator, and other up and downstream systems. And our process in year one is that we have data extracts from DATABASICS for payroll processing, hours for the allocation of salary and benefits expense, and leave hours for accrual purposes, done in a format that is ready to import into all of our other down and upstream systems. So the implementation of DATABASICS has removed our need to manually touch or configure data for consumption by the other systems. So this has saved on time, and it has eliminated the risk of human error when touching data. So we export to a location, we import from another, and no hands touch the data. Now, we talked earlier about there being integrations, web APIs that DataBasics offers or can help build with other large systems, such as Serenic Navigator and UltiPro. I believe that fits Pathfinder's current model, but based on my understanding, Chris, is that DataBasics has many already predefined web APIs, so that's very encouraging.
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, certainly, different organizations choose different solutions to use from the accounting and finance side, and and so what we look to do is certainly create an integration from that side. And looking at you kind of today, I mean, one of the questions, obviously, we've all been impacted with the last 8 months and the impact that COVID has had. You guys were obviously had just deployed the time and leave solution. Any impacts or any adjustments that you guys have had to make to your time and leave process as it relates to COVID, or again, anything we should be talking about here?
Not really, Chris. I mean, having a cloud-based web mobile accessible system made Pathfinder COVID ready. As Jen mentioned, many of our staff either are working in remote communities or working from their home where they don't have the necessary home internet to support even just office work. So they are deployed with mobile hotspots for their internet access for work, as well as so that they can complete their timesheets based off of laptop, tablet, or a mobile phone. And we also have reports that people are using lower technology cell phones that are not smartphones that are able to text the information. So then we have the WhatsApp as well, and that's how things are being done. But having the platform of DataBasics and having it set up the way that we did made us COVID ready.
Okay. And then as you guys kind of look and, to kind of wrap up the conversation here today, before we go to the questions to answer is, long term, as you guys look at kind of your time and leave process, and what are you looking at kind of, future? I mean, obviously we talk about DataBasics, but just in the future, efficiencies you guys are looking for, or other, pieces you're trying to tackle out there. Is there anything that you want to share just as far as kind of where you guys are looking to go from a time and leave perspective? As again, you seem pretty proactive as far as looking at new systems and those areas out there, but as you look at process and all the rest of that.
Chris, I certainly would like to hear Jen, because we balance on different things, I think, very well. But I would like to say that, with 11 months in on DataBasics, that we've achieved a well-working system. It's time entered as worked, and it's done in real time. We have a catalog of reports available that aligns very well with our timesheet cycles and our financial reporting periods. One of the things that we've started, and we certainly want to go to in our second year, is the development of reports that I think are more ad hoc inquiry, based on a need that isn't on a timesheet cycle. It's based on a need that a supervisor may have, or a program or a finance manager may have, or something that budgeting and reporting is working on for proposals, or for supporting donor audits. Things that we knew what we needed, and we think we did very well for the implementation. And now is the time for us to start developing things that we don't yet know, or that you can't plan for. And I think that we have the tool in both DataBasics, in our reporting with JasperSoft, the DataBasics reporting tool. And now we're ready to expand, and we're looking forward to it. Jen?
Yeah, we started off very small, replacing what we have. And in the last couple of months, we've actually been able to leverage JasperSoft to have staff around the world be able to pull their own reports out of DataBasics. At the beginning, we had to pull all the reports, provide them to the offices and that sort of thing. And as we've gone along and we've gotten our, more time under our belts, we've been able to create different reports that people have asked for. We've been able to put security against it so that they can only run certain reports against their particular country, their particular project, whatever it may be. So we're not only giving people information, but we're also opening the system up for them to self-serve on some of this information as well. So we're looking to do more of that as we go forward, so that people don't have to rely on other people to find out data.
Okay. No, that makes sense. And again, the interesting thing here is as we talk about your process out there, and I think it's a testament to the organization you guys have there at Pathfinder is and kind of wrap this all together is that again, Data Basics, we were engaged with you from kind of the initial procurement perspective. We looked at what you guys are looking to accomplish. Again, your existing challenges you had in place, what you were trying to accomplish with your requirements and your RFP. We worked with you through your procurement and then ultimately through your implementation and deployment out there. And so it's interesting to look at how you guys have gone about kind of structuring that process, managing the implementation, looking at the ultimate rollout, and then obviously staying active in there. And that's why I asked that last question was just because I know you guys are always looking at ways to kind of tweak it and get it better. And I think obviously as you look at this, the company audit, I'm sure there'll be more changes moving forward. So with that, I wanted to turn or open the floor up to see if there were any additional questions out there. I think we've got about another 6 or 7 minutes before we hit the top of the hour. But if there are any other questions, again, I'd be happy to answer them. Or obviously I've got Brian and Jen on the phone here and they'd be happy to jump in and
Chris, there is one more question in the chat box that it didn't really fit in with where we were, so I'd like to address it now. Someone has asked if we've considered using default charge codes for instances where a staff can't complete their timesheet on time. We are DCAA compliant, which means that we must enter our time as worked. So we don't have default time codes. What we do in an instance where a person cannot complete their timesheet on time is that we have a missing timesheet code. We code their time to that so that payroll can be allocated and processes can continue to run. Once that employee is then able to complete their timesheet, they will go and revise the timesheet that was set to missing, and we will then reallocate the funds appropriately according to the completed and approved submitted timesheet that they redo.
Jen, also something about default codes is that our prior system was very difficult to utilize things such as favorites or setting up of a charge string if you have more than one timesheet charging dimension. With Data Basics, there are multiple ways where you can save frequently charged codes. And we received significant feedback that the favorites function and the a function called allow these projects to move to the future timesheet with no hours, of course, for DCA compliance, is utilized. So that's a good favorite in Data Basics.
Let's see if there's any other questions out there.
Great. Yeah, thank you, everybody, for your questions. Go ahead. If you do have any, type them in the chat. I have seen a couple sent my way. So what is the #1 recommendation that you would give to an organization that's attempting a similar transition?
I'll let Brian or Jen answer that.
I started talking and realized I was muted. Know what you want. So if you're considering moving to a new timesheet, any new system, evaluate what do you have now, what's working for you, what's not working for you. And as we said, it was so important for us to involve all of Pathfinders around the world. We have like 16 different countries working. They all have different rules. They all have different paid time off requests. They all have different things. But we made sure before we embarked on this that we touched base with all of our offices to make sure that we understood their requirements and that those were taken into account. And we had a these are our requirements. We do not care to go outside of these requirements if we don't have to. And these are our wish lists. If we can get these items, great. If we can't, we can't. But we had to get the required features in. And sorry, I'm reading questions as I go. Yes, we are using leave management functionality now. We used it, as we said, we held off on it for our initial implementation. so that we could get people up and running on actually entering timesheets. Then we went through and we got all balances from countries worldwide, loaded them into the system, and set up, I don't know, a couple of hundred of different types of leave codes, and are using those currently. And somebody would like us to repeat the statement on how our time periods, pay reporting are coordinated. We actually have two timesheet periods within the system. And I believe, Chris, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you can have more than two. I'm not sure. But we have two that we currently use. We use a biweekly schedule for our US people. We use a monthly schedule for our international folks. So the biweekly people actually fill out weekly timesheets, the monthly people semi-monthly timesheets, and then everything is brought together based on our accounting month and pulled into our Serenic financial system based on that dates.
And Chris, going back to the question about the project and similar organizations approaching the project, and a personal opinion is to always remember that there are two parties in any implementation. There's going to be the you, and there's going to be your supplier partner. In this case, for us, it was DATABASICS. We know what we did. We know what we delivered in a 36-day period, which we recommend you do not do. But the important thing is to find a partner that will do what they say they're going to do. At Pathfinder 16 years and being in the professional world for 24 years, I've been disappointed by partners not living up to what they say they can and will do. And in this case, DATABASICS assured us that if we brought our A game, that they would deliver, and they did. So I would just focus on your organization. I would try to keep agendas and individual interests. Like if you have a party that thinks that mobile is the most important thing over the adoption of the system by the user community, just remember why you're doing what you're doing. And that's probably in support of the mission of your organization. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We did have one more question come in that I think, Chris, is more about DATABASICS functionality generally. So does the system allow for creating biweekly schedules, and can you have more than one labor charge field as a default?
Yes. Yes. And I don't even know what Pathfinder's, but I know we semi-monthly, weekly, bi-weekly is, and you can even mix and match if you've got, contractors out there. But yes, it would certainly support multiple reporting periods there.
Great. So I think that is all the questions that we have had submitted. You will, if you are on this call, you will receive an email with the recording, the slides, and contact information. So if you have other questions, you can follow up either with the speakers or with Humentum, and we can make sure that you get the information you need. And I encourage all of you to check out the other offerings we have coming up from Humentum. And just want to thank everyone from DATABASICS and Pathfinder for all of your help with these. So Brian, Jen, Chris, and the rest of the DATABASICS team, thank you so much for giving us your time today and for sharing your experiences with everyone on the call.
Well, thank you very much for the time from my side. Thank you, Brian and Jen, for joining us today and helping everyone get a little insight to how you guys are handling your time and leave practice.
Thanks, Chris. We're so happy to talk about it with you.
Great. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.